everyone and good morning. I'm Tracey Cross, and on behalf of Women in Super and the Financial Services Council, I welcome you to this first breakfast as we kick off the FSC ReGenerations Conference 2021. Well, we finally got here. Not the intimate breakfast setting that we had envisaged, but we are here nevertheless to have an important conversation. I'd like to thank all the conference sponsors, and in particular DLA Piper, who is sponsoring this session. We know the challenges that face women in securing their financial well-being, with the economic impact of COVID-19 making the need to enhance women's positions even more important. But what are we doing about these issues? Under the 2021-24 National Strategy for Financial Capability, action is called for. FSC is charged with running a significant campaign to demystify money for women. Within Women in Super, our members are calling for action. So in response, Women in Super have brought us all here today with our esteemed panel to consider solutions to address the financial challenges that face women that will result in impactful change to ensure that we leave no one behind. So it's my pleasure to introduce today's panel to you. Maretha Smit, CEO of Diversity Works, Karen Silk, GM, Sustainability Strategy and CEO of BTNZ Westpac, Latayvia Tualasea, YWCA Young Leader, Financial Mentor and Pasifika Advocate, and our very own Jane Wrightson, our Retirement Commissioner. It's going to be a great conversation, I know, and thank you all so much for joining us. But thank you to all of you out there that have made the time to join us in this important conversation. And we really would like you to participate. Your thoughts and views are really important to us. And even though we might not get to touch on them all today, because I'm sure we will run out of time, they will form a very solid foundation to the further actions that we want to pursue after this call. So on that note, if you could open your chat and fire through any questions that you have for the panellists together with your views. With me today is Gillian Boyes of Women in Super, and she's going to be collating your thoughts and sharing them with us. So if she pops up on the screen, she'll have something to share. So thank you, Gillian. So on that note, to kick things off, I'd like to ask each of the panellists to introduce themselves by sharing what financial wellbeing means to them and why they were drawn to participate in this conversation. What is their money story? And Maretha, let's start with you first.
I would love to say thank you very much. It's lovely to be here this morning. I guess for me it is about social sustainability. I'm a mother. And the financial well-being for me is 100% connection to my ability to provide for my daughter. And in speaking with other mothers, I hear similar sentiments across all ages, ethnicities, and abilities. When mothers thrive, the next generation thrive. And with this, we will start to reduce the impact of intergenerational poverty. And this is actually what brings me to this conversation this morning. And my story, I suppose, Tracey, like so many, has to do with navigating that financial unpredictability that goes with single parenthood, and what this means in terms of starting early to provide for my own financial security in later years. It probably didn't help that I'm stubborn with a disproportionate sense of independence, which is, of course, for some really daft financial decisions that I've made, and that's probably a story for a wine rather than a conference. But I think that I've always seen money purely as a means to an end. And in those early years of my career, there were just so many ends that the means had to provide for. And actually, I think that as women, we probably need to think a little bit more about money as an end in itself, which would help those of us who want to pretend to be so fiercely independent to get our priorities right. And I suppose, so those would be the reasons why I'm here this morning.
Fabulous. Thanks for joining us, Maretha. Latayvia.
Morning, everyone. So just thinking about what brings me to this conversation, I'm really passionate about eradicating poverty. I think being raised by a single mum and we were dependent on a main benefit. So we grew up in quite severe poverty. We moved over 14 times, lived in a women's refuge. We went through quite a bit, but it wasn't something new. It wasn't something out of the ordinary in the community that I grew up in. So I think for me, I have a real awareness that I'm one of the lucky ones. So something that's what drives, I think, my passion towards kind of financial literacy as well. A lot of the skills that I've learned, I've had to kind of learn myself. I didn't have parents or grandparents who have these skills, and that's through no fault of their own. So working in the kind of advocacy space, that's something that's really important to me, financial literacy. But kind of to touch on what Maretha said around, for me personally, it's about moving from survival mode to thriving mode. As a young woman and as the first in my family to attend university, and wanting to do what I can to ensure that spaces, including spaces like this, are intersectional as well, and that Pacific women are not only at the table but are considered at systemic levels as well. But we'll talk more about that later on. But yeah,
that's fabulous. Thank you, Latayvia. I think it's our financial well-being is certainly a very personal sort of state, isn't it? And I think that our money story has such a big impact on how we deal with things moving forward, and often we don't actually appreciate or are aware of that story. Until we can unpack that, we can't actually sort of move forward. But Jane, I mean, you're a retirement commissioner, but you haven't sort of come from a sort of a financial sort of background into this space. What's your story? Why are you so passionate about this area?
Well, right now it is, of course, because I'm all consumed and focused on retirement. And I was thinking what retirement might mean for me in terms of money story. And it's, of course, the means to live comfortably, to help others, to have a few treats, and the wherewithal to help my daughter if she needs it. So, to do that, of course, you need your backstory. My money story is basically one of luck and average management, certainly not good management. My wealth is primarily in my house and the savings I've managed to accumulate over a career that where I haven't had too many life shocks. I'm single as well, so I haven't had an expensive divorce to deal with. I've managed a seismic strengthening program, so I was lucky I was still working when that problem emerged. I've had no long periods of illness or unemployment. I got out of the share market 3 months before the crash in '87, which was, again, completely lucky. For that last 3 months, I was very cross that I got out too early. And I'm a single mother myself, but I've had the resources in the family to make it work. So I think around my money story, as I said, luck and average management. But I think for all of these perspectives, recognising one's own privilege is important. And I have been privileged. I've come from a working class background as well, but I haven't had anything extraordinary to deal with. So I'm lucky and privileged.
Thank you, Jane. I think that privilege is an important point, isn't it? Something that we often forget about, and there's so many different stories out there and considerations that we need to take into account. Karen, what about you?
Hi, good morning. Hey, look, well, I'm obviously very privileged to have had a career in an industry where financial literacy and an understanding of money is actually at the foundation of what we do. Unfortunately, I also work in an industry where we see on a daily basis the negative consequences and the emotional stress that goes with New Zealanders who've not been so lucky and have not had the opportunity to build their own financial capability. And through circumstances, as the previous speakers have said, quite often not of their own making. And so we, on a daily basis, see people who are in very vulnerable positions. From my perspective, from my money story, as I talked to you earlier this week, Tracey, I'm very lucky. I'm from a very warm, caring family background, but it was also a background where we lived from paycheck to paycheck. And so I saw the pressure and stress my parents were under to ensure that we all got the right education, that we were all warm and fed every day. And, as I got older and I entered into my teens, one of the key things for me, and in particular as I headed towards finishing school, was I knew that wasn't what I wanted for me. And that was a real driver for me to continue on with my education and start to build a different outcome and be in a position where not only could I support my own children, but also give back to my parents, and in particular my mother, who was an incredible role model for me.
Thank you. Jane, just moving on to sort of some of the issues that we sort of see. I know that a comprehensive survey was circulated earlier in the year in relation to financial wellbeing, which was looking to feed into the national strategy. Can you share with us some of the findings from that research and survey?
That's the New Zealand Financial Capability Study, which is on our website. What I wanted to talk about briefly, though, was a companion paper that we're publishing in the next few weeks, which is doing a deep dive from that study into the financial capability of women. And it's frustrating because we're not changing fast enough, we women and we the industry. There is, the women's deep dive has kind of 5 key messages really, and none of them are a surprise, and that's why it's frustrating. So there is lower financial well-being amongst for women than there are for men, and certainly much lower financial well-being for wahine Māori. Women are great at day-to-day money management and saving and budgeting. All of that stuff ranks really highly. We're better at long-term thinking and impulsivity control than men. Interesting, isn't it? 1 in 5 KiwiSaver holders, women KiwiSaver holders don't contribute. And then of course have lower balances, and you know what that means as you come towards the end of working life. So there's some policy implications around that, I think. And there's a clear gender gap in using and understanding financial products. So what this means is that women continue to miss out on opportunities to build on assets and savings that could close the gender pension gap. And why this isn't seen as a magnificent business opportunity for providers in the industry completely eludes me. This research is not new, it's new to me. Apparently it's been going on for years. It's not that women are stupid or thick. We're just not being talked to correctly. We don't have the right information, and we don't have the right support and encouragement on the way through. And this is a spectacular business opportunity. I throw this most particularly to financial advisors who on the one hand say, we're only small businesses and we're getting crippled by the new legislative environment, blah, 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 blah. And I go, yes, you are. But there are opportunities out here, and if you work collectively, you might be able to get something interesting up, because it's not that women are not listening to these messages, it's that we're not being communicated to in the right way.
Karen, just picking up that point, I mean, that seems to be a bit of a call to you in respect of, with Westpac. I know that the bank does a lot in relation to financial wellbeing of women, and you've done the research in relation to sharing the load. What would be your response to Jane, and what do you see as some of the issues?
Yeah, so if I think about just a point that Jane made there, it leans back into the point that actually, as an organisation, your employees need to be reflective of the audience that they're talking to. And I think that's one of the critical issues when we think about the engagement with women. How many of those advisors are women? How many of the senior leaders in organisations are women? And if we don't put a greater level of focus on that, and a greater level of focus on shifting the shape of our workforces to reflect the audience that are our customers, then we're never actually going to shift the dial, because your level of empathy and understanding isn't there. And so that's a really critical issue that you need to address. And I know Latayvia will talk about some of the cultural imbalance. I'll maybe lean more in towards some of the more gender imbalance that we still continue to see, certainly within the financial services sector and more broadly in business, I would say, across all of New Zealand. Look, it's if I reflect back on Jane's point, an average woman could continue to earn less than men during their working lives, and as a consequence, the average saving levels are lower. We also have a longer life expectancy, so if you're heading into retirement, we actually need more, not less. we've had a real focus at Westpac about not just trying to resolve some of these issues internally within the organisation, but you need to create greater awareness around this. And so we've invested over the last 5 or so years in a number of reports. So Women in Leadership, the really critical area of gender pay gap, and there's a significant issue. And then finally, of course, sharing the load. Sharing the load is really was kind of the third of these, and it was about trying to get to understanding what are some of the drivers and attitudes that sit beneath us not seeing greater participation of women in the workforce. And so we mandated a survey of 2,400 Kiwis focusing on the attitudes to paid and unpaid work in households. And the outcomes of that research really mirrored what we saw in offshore surveys. On average, men do less of the unpaid childcare and domestic work at home and more of the paid work. Importantly, where couples were working equal paid hours, men on average estimated they did 30% less of the unpaid work and domestic work in the home. It also, the survey results indicated that in New Zealand, parental leave is still largely taken by women, and that even after returning to work, the woman remain with the core of the extra domestic chores. And so coming out of that report, we said there's really 4 things that need to be focused on. The first of those was that normalising flexible work was incredibly important, and that's something that has already been accelerated by the pandemic. So having flexibility to work from home was perceived as a really key incentive to take on paid work, and also enabling the sharing of that load of work at home. And one of the key things that came out of that was the improvement in wellbeing that came from being able to work flexibly. Second of those was it was important to empower fathers to take parental leave. The research also shows that early involvement in parenting leads to greater propensity to retain that involvement and allowing a more even and balanced approach to paid work between couples. You've got to make childcare more affordable if we want to get more people back into the workforce. And we really have to challenge those traditional gender norms about whose role it is to take care of the child in the home.
Mm. Yeah, well, look, certainly on behalf of all of us, thank you for commissioning that research. I think there's some really important messages there and things that we just don't consider. You know, we're sort of focused on the big things, but that sharing the load is just so important.
Well, it is. Otherwise, women end up with the old superwoman syndrome going on.
That's right. Yeah, well, often we're our biggest problems, aren't we?
We are.
Potentially. And I think in your report, you know, you refer to, you know, there being a potential 1.5 billion you know, economic benefit if we sort this out. So it just seems crazy not to, for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah.
Latayvia, I'll come to you. You know, young Pasifika woman. I mean, how are you feeling in this sort of space? It must be quite disheartening at times in relation to seeing Pasifika, you know, wahine paid less, and I think too, you know, we sort of talked the other day in relation to there not being specific data around Pasifika, and you're a financial mentor, you know, you're talking to the young, you know, what are your views as to the issues out there?
Yeah, so just to kind of break down the data that we do have, if we're looking at the gender and ethnic pay gap, Pacific women essentially started working for free from September 22nd. And that's kind of a harrowing statistic. Wahine Māori stopped working from October 3rd, and our Asian wahine stopped working from October 23rd. And then I think from the beginning of December or end of November, our Pākehā women started working for free, which is heavy, you know, it feels like a lot. But I also acknowledge that we're not a homogenous group. I'm definitely a part of this kind of privileged group of Pasifika young women who have a lot more agency than our migrant dreamers, you know, than my grandparents had working factory jobs. So I kind of want to speak to these different experiences because we're not just, you know, one group. And we've got different aspirations and we also have different opportunities. So I think as a young woman who's leaving university, I have a lot of talented, intelligent, like Pasifika friends, young women. And none of us have ever had conversations about salaries before. This is our first time, you know, and we don't have parents we can talk to about these things. And, you know, I also acknowledge a lot of people in working class upbringings also struggle with this as well. So I think we're a part of this kind of group that's coming through that are being faced with a lot of diversity workshops. And what I'd like to say is it's not enough. It's not enough to have one day to talk about all these different minorities in your organization and tick off a box. You know, if you really value our opinion and value all the extra labor we do, like Pacific people volunteer 14,000 hours a week in New Zealand. That's a lot of unpaid labor. And women do a lot of unpaid labor. I don't know the stats, but we just know. If you know, you know. But when I think about all the unpaid labor that goes on, I think about the workplace as well. And I think about the need for organizations to value all of the different skills that we bring and not just as a consultant for one day. If you really value diversity in your workplace, you'd hire people who have lived experiences that are different. And it's intersectional experiences too, you know, not just ticking a box if someone's Pacific and if someone's a woman, like looking at their socioeconomic background, their lived experiences, and all the kind of skills that they've learned through there. So that's the kind of space that I'm in, and that my friends are in as part of our first to go through uni kind of thing. And then on the other side, the families that we support and the families that I grew up in, they're struggling to pay their bills. You know, especially with COVID, as we all know, inequities are highlighted. And I think it's important that we as financial services have cultural understanding, because cultural competency is kind of the bare minimum. You know, we can understand that there are different values that take place, and I'm sure Karen can speak to the personal experience of we have a lot of cultural obligations as well, and I think it's quite a privileged position to be able to say you don't have enough, you can't give anything, you know, or to say that you know, you'd rather be rich than look rich. It's not as easy as that. And when you come to New Zealand from the islands, there's a clear expectation to give back, because your family have stayed back so that you could have the opportunity to pursue education. So when I enter the workplace, so when my peers enter, it's not just about ourselves and our own financial well-being, it's about a collective well-being. And so that's a lot to carry sometimes. And then also our families who are working on the front lines of the factories as well, also have those obligations as well. So I think it's about meeting people in the middle. How can we find solutions that are client-led as well? So when we presented to Decile 1 High School in South Auckland, I asked them all to close their eyes, and I said to them, okay, hands up who's got an FPOS card or a savings. And out of 71 students, 3 put their hand up. They were all 17, 18. And that's heartbreaking. It's we as a system have failed our young people. So there's kind of different needs in the Pacific community, and I can't speak to everyone, but that's kind of what I wanted to kind of highlight today. Yeah.
Oh, no, thank you for that. I think there's really important points there that, you know, to solve these problems, to take action, we really need a better understanding, you know, about all the individual sort of groups in our society, to be that impactful change and to sort of take action. So thank you for that. I feel your passion, and it certainly is time for action. Maretha, diversity works, you know, a lot of work focus in the workplace, and Latayvia talked about the pay gender gap. I'm sure you have very strident views on that and what's happening and what's not happening.
Yeah, and Tracey, I just love what Latayvia was saying about you know that you know the stuff. And what I can say in terms of our work as Diversity Works is that we work with members and organisations across the country every year. And what we see in our research and with our members, is exactly what we've heard from Latayvia and is exactly what we've heard from Karen this morning. So in our annual wrap-up, we've identified 4 issues this year in the gender debate for women. And the first is what both previous speakers have mentioned, is that pay gap issue. And obviously massive issues with intersectionality there. The piece that I would like to add here is just to explain that the pay gaps that exist in our workplaces today are largely systemic in nature. So pay gap discrepancies are that culmination of seemingly small inequities that happen all through touch points throughout that employee life cycle. It's everything from recruitment, the ability to negotiate that very starting salary, what the previous salary was that very often is the starting ground for negotiations, the impacts culturally and generationally, and from a gender perspective in order to negotiate. The level of reliance that you have in terms of the negotiations, all of that at recruitment phase, at that initial start salary negotiations. Then it goes to job design, what's perceived as being men's work and what's perceived to be women's work and how that gets valued differently. It goes right through to those performance reviews, those promotions, and everything that if you don't walk, look, and talk like me, I don't actually think that you are 100% up to the job like me. And all of that adds up over time. The second, and largely related to the first point, has to do with access to leadership. So MB reported earlier this year that New Zealand women still face a myriad of barriers to access the C-suite. And that glass ceiling is there. So a lot of that has to do with how workplaces deal with care, like Karen has mentioned earlier, those care responsibilities. We still focus a lot on making that workplace more family friendly. When we think that we are doing diversity inclusion well, we think that we're making workplaces more family friendly for women. But actually what we need to do is to start looking at how we can get men to share more equitably in that load of care. The third and the fourth issues that we've seen this year are largely COVID related, but it's still indicative of those traditional inequities and how that have a more adverse effect on women. Number 3 has to do with burnout and the fact that women in leadership have been really harder hit with the lockdowns due to that level of emotional investment that they make in the caring for their staff, in addition to the burden of care at home. So there's a high level of burnout that women are feeling, that our female leaders are feeling, and we are really concerned about time that when we need women leaders the most, they are the most exhausted, and how do we invest in that? And the fourth issue has to do with that much reported issue of the disproportionate impact on women in terms of COVID-related redundancies and what that does for financial well-being and the ability to care for families. So I suppose overall in all of this, unconscious bias actually has a very, very large part to play. Whether it's the pushback that we don't have the right competencies or experience, which is code for your background isn't quite like mine, or there just isn't enough skilled women candidates because they actually only recruit within traditional talent pools. And my personal favorite, surely this is all political correctness gone mad and we okay, we don't really see what we need to change. We really need to start becoming a lot more intentional about how we mitigate against bias all throughout the life cycle for women in employment.
Mm. Yeah, thanks, Maretha. I think that there's certainly a lot of challenges there, and I think your last point in relation to becoming more intentional about all of this is just so essential. Also picking up the other point around this isn't, the problem doesn't rest with women. No. It's not that we're not good enough, we don't know enough. A lot of it is societal, it's sort of structural, it's encouraging the men to sort of share more, all of these sorts of things. So much to address there. Karen, what do you see as some of the solutions? A big question.
Sorry, just having a little problem unmuting there. I keep clicking the wrong thing. It was really interesting hearing all of those points because I could relate to every single one of them. As a woman leader, I've experienced very different sets of expectations around how I should behave that the type of things that I should do, the extra that you are expected to do. I have had to have conversations with men working for me from time to time and explain that I was not their mother, and that the kind of conversation they were having with me was one they wouldn't have with a male boss. So please don't set those additional expectations on me. Look, there are many things an organisation can do. The first thing, I'll talk to it from an organisational level, is start tracking and measuring and setting goals, and be really transparent around it. And transparency is really important because it holds you to account. So as soon as you start to publish stats, as soon as you start to say, I am setting an intentional goal, it requires you to do something around it because people are aware of what you do. I talked about women in leadership. We have, for the last 6 or 7 years, had more than 50% of our women. Our leaders are women. The problem with that is that that includes at the most junior level within the organisation, so you need to start getting real about it. And so when we did our gender pay gap report, we said actually you've got to change that and look at the proportion of women who are in the top 3 levels of management. And that was a different story. So when we first released the report, it was 37%. We said that has to get to 50%. So 2.5 years later, we're now at 47% because it was an intentional change that we wanted to make. But then when you actually step back and go, well, actually, that hasn't solved the gender pay gap for us, because it's not just about leadership. It is also about higher paid roles and different skill sets. And so making sure you are bringing people into those roles that are higher paid, so finance, technology, investment management, institutional banking, they are the higher paid roles, and we need to get our balances right there. We have a gender pay gap still of 28.5% in our organisation, and we need to shift that. And so getting back into those drivers, understanding on unconscious bias, and so we do unconscious bias training for our leaders. Making sure that as a woman, I sit down and have conversations for the women that work for me, because I know when it comes to the year-end review, the guy's going to come in and tell me that he's done a marvellous job. When he's done 60%, it'll be 120%. When she comes in, the first thing she says is, it's been not been a bad year, but these are the things I did wrong. Stop right there now. Start with all the things that have gone well and be confident about it, because your male colleagues are doing that. And so there's a story around that. We, following on from sharing the load report, made the decision to extend the amount of time you could take for that early parenting leave to 4 weeks, to actively try and encourage and create an environment where the men would take that 4-week period of leave and become part of sharing that load, and then encourage them that parental leave was not just for women, it was for men as well. One of the things I found really interesting coming back to New Zealand after working in Australia, where you would think that the situation was, and there's a bit of bias here, is worse, is actually men in Australia, I found that worked for me, were far more open to taking parental leave. And I had many men over there going back, taking 6 months off and sharing that parental leave period with their wives in order for them to allow to continue that career. We need to create environments and a norm within our organisations that says that's the right thing to do. Allow them to make that choice and don't hold it against people.
Yeah, look, just so many important messages there. And, everyone in the audience, I hope this is all, stirring up things within you in relation to your own environments and the action you may or may not be taking. So please, feed through your thoughts, what you see as the issues, what you see as the solutions through to Gillian, so we can sort of collate that for further action. Latayvia, one of the big things that I see is women's confidence, and Karen sort of touched on that. How do you see what is the solution there for women, for young women, for Pasifika women? How do we increase that confidence? Because we do need to step up ourselves. We do need to ask, don't we, as you sort of mentioned before, for sort of pay transparency, which is easier said than done. How do we move forward with that?
Yeah, so that's a tough one, but I'm just thinking about, I forgot to mention, I should have remembered, but so I'm part of the Mind the Gap campaign. So that's a campaign being run at the moment about signing organisations up to a pay registry, and also getting the government to mandate all organisations to report both their gender and ethnic pay gap. So I would encourage, that's one solution in terms of what Karen was saying about reporting. So encourage your organisation. One of our hashtags is #JustAsk. Which again is easier for some than others, but still difficult for any of us as women. So just asking not only for yourself, but for other women in your organisation, and for our men to also ask as well, but putting the onus onto organisations rather than on the individual to report, so then you can make a real commitment to closing those gaps. And then going on to your actual question, Tracey, sorry, in terms of confidence, I think allyship is really important. And I was thinking about what Maretha was saying in terms of people talking about these political correctness. It's just people being more respectful. I think being PC is just being more respectful, and having rooms that don't all look the same. But thinking about confidence, I think of even when we were preparing for this panel, I was saying to each of you, I was like, I want to say some things, but I need to be graceful. And that's ingrained, is that I need to go into this and I need to already mitigate this idea of being an angry brown woman, or young and inexperienced, or just like as women, we're not allowed to be passionate because then you're just angry. So and then each of you as leaders, you're telling me like there's no need to be graceful, be authentic. So I think it's important and that made a massive difference for me in terms of how I was able to approach this conversation. So thinking about organizations is when you see young talent, I think watching out for it, taking care of it, and ensuring that they don't burn out, because that happens to a lot of my friends in internships, and I've been in internships like that where they see someone young and talented and they think, this is our token person. But it's important about taking care of that and nourishing that talent as well, as using it for your diversity photos. But anyways, I think that's really important, but it starts early as well. But I think organizations also need to educate themselves as around cultural values and humility. For example, I've been brought up that servant leadership is integral and that your actions should speak for itself. But more often than not, organizations take advantage of that service because we don't demand. So I think mentorship is really important, but also organizations having that awareness and just tracking, I think, is really important. But that is a real hard one. There's that systemic stuff in place too, but I think it's about meeting in the middle. Yeah, it's great. I think, yes, scrap the grace. We've done grace to death and it hasn't got us very far, so we need to be more demanding and we need to just ask, so that's fabulous. Gillian, I see you've popped up. Have you got something to share with us?
Latayvia, you've touched on this a little bit, but the question was asked, have you ever experienced imposter syndrome within the financial world, and how do you overcome these feelings if you did?
Is it me? Okay. Okay, all the time. I'm young, I look 18, but I'm 23 and I'm Pacific. So for example, when I go to advocate for my clients at WINS or at the bank, they'll ask me if I'm a client, but that happens to all of us, so I experience imposter syndrome all the time because often I'm in a room that doesn't look like me. you know. So, but I think when you have such a strong like obligation to your family, you kind of just like have to get over it yourself. But I think having a strong like tribe and network of like-minded friends, and I'm a girl's girl. It's girl support girls in my circle, you know, women's women, you know, and I think having a strong network outside of your kind of workspace that have similar values and are experiencing similar things has made it so much easier, because you don't feel alone. You don't feel like this lone brown voice kind of a thing. So I think we all as women experience imposter syndrome, but it's something that we just deal with and try to make it easier for the next people coming through.
I think too, you know, I was reading something the other day. I think we need to wipe the discussion around imposter syndrome, because, you know, this whole fake it till you make it. And I know I've been there, you know, I've had that sort of mantra, oh, well, I'll just fake it till and make it, it'll be okay. It's already putting us down, just even considering that. So we need to, you know, our language is something that's very impactful, and we need to sort of to change. Maretha, you know, lots of things for organisations to do. I'm conscious of time. I mean, this conversation could go on for all morning, but you know, what are some sort of solutions that you would put to organisations?
We need to get more women in leadership, Tracey, and we need to understand that leadership doesn't need to look the way that it looked in the mid-1900s. And if we get this right, it stands to reason that these women will contribute to making the decisions that we need to bring even more equity into those workplaces. Our traditional policies, practices, perceptions, those continue to undermine the advancement of women. And although progress is being made, it's not at the pace that we need it. So I think it starts with organizations making a visible commitment from the top to diversity inclusion. Like Karen said, backed by goals and measures, different leadership styles, different experiences. I'm often asked about goals, quotas and targets, about increasing access for women to leadership. And there's that lovely African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. And if you want to go far, travel together. So for me, this is about, do you want to go far or do you want to go fast? And coming from South Africa, I've seen the change that quotas can make in a relatively short period of time to address historical inequities. And admittedly, it is a very, very, very blunt instrument. So we probably need a combination of targets and quotas to speed up the process, but we need to start doing something to move faster, especially now during the COVID times. And there's a bit of hope there. Is note that women have traditionally found lots of opportunity during periods of war and downturn. If you look at World War II and how women then entered the workforce, if we do this well, as Wahine, this is the time for ourselves, and we can actually stand up and take space in this time.
Thank you. Now, James, sitting there quietly, I know you're very frustrated about the lack of progress. What do you see as the solution?
I'd like us to think as an industry about what we do for our women customers and stakeholders. And I understand that you've got to, you know, we have to get our own house in order first. So women's position inside industry as workers is one thing, but how we serve our people is quite another. And all of this is why women are one of the 3 target audiences in the National Strategy for Financial Capability that we launched this year, which the industry was kind enough to support. I spoke to most of the leaders in the big organisations and the trade organisations who were happy to support it. I didn't know if that was token happy or not. We're going to find out. But it seems to me, as the newcomer here, that the industry needs a coherent plan for women. The Nat Strat is talking about, has 3 main goals, right? Demystify money, working together, consistent content. None of that's particularly rocket science. The FSC, I have asked to pick up the Women's Shifting the Dial project for the strategy this year, which will be around demystifying money. And all that work is being led by Tracey Cross. I'd like to see the industry now put its hand in its pocket, please, because Tracey is going to need a project manager for this. Otherwise, the project will go, you know, when you put it in the hand of volunteers, it's just too hard. And the point of these projects is to show that if we can think about a big, hairy, audacious problem collectively just once, what could we do about it in a way that we could not do individually or with our individual organisations? So that's the challenge, and the people running this project for us are going to need some help. Broader than that, again, the industry does need a coherent plan for women. I'm hoping this project will be the beginning of a conversation that says, how does the financial services industry treat its women employees, treat its women stakeholders, educate women in New Zealand? How do we do that?
Thank you, Jane. It's insightful as always. Gillian.
So look, just a question here, and Jane, obviously you're putting the pressure on industry, but there's a question here about, what should we be looking to government to do to address these issues as well? And I don't know.
That's a standard New Zealand thing, and it's nothing to do with us. The government has to do something. But my challenge back is, because I'm not the government, what is the industry doing for itself?
Yeah. Look, I think that's the question. Yeah,
and what the government does is, in effect, finance my office to try and pull some of this together. And my job is, I think, to fill the gaps for what industry will do. You don't want government organisations treading all over the top of it. Government's job is to regulate and to fund certain activities. Industry's job is to serve the team of 5 million.
Yeah. And just one other one here, Tracey, this is more of a comment, but also an idea. So just a comment around the specific needs of migrant women, often starting from scratch and tasks that the local population would be used to are very different in New Zealand. So perhaps easy access to support for women by women would really go a long way to welcoming migrant women who often feel very isolated. So just a specific comment there.
Yeah, so true. Thank you very much. Look, just great content here. I'm conscious of the time. I'm just going to quickly go to each of the panellists. What is the one impactful action we can take? And the floor is yours if you'd like to share a further message to the industry. Everyone will be listening. And so Latayvia, we'll start with you.
Sorry. Okay, I'm unmuted. So I think basically I'm thinking around serving our teams as organisations, but also clients. Something I ask myself every day is the difference is, am I treating people with empathy rather than sympathy? Sympathy being poor you're in this situation. Empathy being poor us as a society, as an organisation, we've allowed you to fall between the gaps, and what can we do? So what are we doing to check our own privilege as organisations and as individuals?
Fabulous. Karen?
Mine is about education. I think we are failing our younger generation. Understanding financial wellbeing, improving financial literacy means that we need to be starting to teach this as a foundational life skill in schools. And there is none of that. And well,
not enough. Maybe.
There's definitely not enough that's going on in that space, and I agree with you around the industry itself showing leadership. Waiting to be regulated leads to a compliance mindset. This is not shifting the dial's never going to be done through compliance. It will only ever be done through leadership. There's a role for the industry itself to help support and expand that education. Many of us are taking it into communities, but we need to do it in a way where we're part of that community, and just digitising and webinars works for a cohort. It doesn't work for all. So understand your audience, put yourself in their shoes, and start with that education and own it.
Thanks, Karen. Look, this is a really important question, and I would ask, everyone out there to fire through their thoughts as to what they think is the most, impactful action that we can take. Because, as I said, this is the beginning of a journey. This is about taking action, and we will be following through. So please share your thoughts with us. Maretha, what's your one action?
So much have already been said, Tracey, so I'm going to go with also less grace and just call it as it is. And I think that it does go both ways. Organisations need to make space for women in leadership, but also as women in the workplace, We need to give ourselves permission to be women and not merely assimilate into a male world and adopt those male behaviors. I very, very often see how women adopt those male behaviors in their journey up the corporate ladder, and they are often the worst enemies and the worst critics of women. We are incredibly bad at coaching, mentoring, and championing our own and each other, and we really do need to fix that.
Thank you. Jane?
It's very obvious that women in the industry need to work together, if only to share their own stories and sort their own work out. But we also need to share knowledge, because it's not that the industry is being deliberately badly behaved. I mean, I think that's the thing. It's just that we're still in an area where I think there's a large level of consciousness raising of some of those issues that needs to happen. So I'd like to see a ginger group of women sector leaders actually getting together and driving and saying, I'll commit my organisation to do something that's strategic, that looks over the sector as a whole.
Thank you. Look, I hope everyone has enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. I think that there is just so much in the content that's being discussed and so many actions that we can take out of it. I think I genuinely believe now is the time for action. We've had enough grace. We've had enough talking about it. Jane's put down the mantle in relation to the national strategy for FSC to lead this project, this campaign around demystifying money for women. As she mentioned, work is being undertaken, and I really encourage you all, if you are interested in supporting us in this space, please, get in contact. If you don't, think about yourself, how you can sort of change the dial, how you can ask the important questions, how you can support your colleagues and those within your organisations. It's not up to the government. It's up to us to make the change, and up to us to have the voice and be the voice behind Jane, spurring her on. As she mentioned, this project in relation to demystifying money for women, it's going to be really exciting. We do need support. We do need funds. So, as I said, I really sort of ask you all to get behind this, because, now is the time. Maybe a bit too late for me, but I've got a 15-year-old daughter, and I want her to be, a lot more financially resilient and aware than I was at her age. The young think differently. Latayvia has sort of shared that with us. We've got cultural differences. We really do need to come together. That is the only way that we are going to make impactful change. So I think that there's really exciting times ahead of us. But it does involve you to get involved and to join us. So, look, thank you for your participation. I'm going to hand over to Nisha now to do a thank you on behalf of DLA Piper as sponsor.
Thank you, Tracey. DLA Piper is very proud to sponsor Women in Super's panel discussion as part of FSC's ReGenerations Conference 2021. On behalf of DLA Piper, I'd like to thank our amazing panellists today for taking the time to join us, and for sharing your research, ideas, and for such thought-provoking discussion. I'd also like to thank Women in Super for organising today's discussion, and for Tracey and Gillian for leading it. I've been a member of Women in Super for a number of years, and I'm very grateful for all your hard work and energy that you put into supporting financial literacy and bringing people together like today to discuss important topics and themes. I've always felt really lucky to have stumbled upon the financial services industry and the knowledge I've gained by providing legal advice and support to a wide range of participants. And I know that after today, I've been putting a lot of thought into what more I can be doing in the position of privilege I'm in, but also as a mother with a young daughter. And I'm really looking forward to having these important conversations with others and sharing the ideas that have been discussed today. We hope that you've enjoyed the session and look forward to seeing you throughout the rest of the conference. Tēnā koutou, and have a great day, everybody.
Fabulous. Thank you, Nisha. Look, on that note, just again, picking up that plea to get in behind us and support, contact FSC, D&I committee that's going to be launched later this afternoon, Women in Super. We will gratefully accept your contribution. So look, thank you everyone. Enjoy the rest of the conference and have a safe and happy Christmas. Thank you.